Welcome to Hungarian Horizon, a podcast about Hungary, its people, and their stories. My name is Balázs Lakatos.
And I'm Barbara Bálint.
Here with us today is Balázs Lakatos, founder of YKRA, a company which manufactures durable backpacks and accessories by hand in Hungary, inspired by the design language of the 70s, and is now present in over 15 countries. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us today. As a starting question, can you tell us what inspired you to start your company?
Sure. I grew up partly in the United States, in New York, and this was back in the 90s, and I moved there with my family in 1993, and this was right after the changing of the regime, and I think for me as a young teenager, just the sheer introduction. I mean, there was definitely a cultural shock, and the introduction to, brands. I mean, of course we had brands here, but the difference was enormous back there. Back then in the States, brands were already huge, global, and I think for me as a child, just the difference between that was very impressive. And I remember when I was 14, and I had this idea that I wanted to start my own brand, a jeans company, and I figured out the name, and it was going to be called Caution, like the road signs, and it was going to be yellow and black, the just exactly like the signs, and I was very much inspired by streetwear brands from the 90s, like Fubu, and another favorite was Jinko, and they manufactured these huge bell-bottom jeans, and as a teenager that had a big impression on me.
Why did you choose this kind of nostalgic design for YKRA?
I think that comes very naturally for me. I think it's a style that I personally I kind of feel connected to this. At 2 years old, we moved to Belgrade, to former Yugoslavia, and Belgrade back then was, I think, kind of the Switzerland of the Eastern Bloc. It really was a magnificent place, with everything was clean, everything was modern, everything that we didn't necessarily have, they had. And so they were, I think, much more open to the West, and you could buy Beatles albums, and I think they had jeans and things that, for us Hungarians were inaccessible. I think the style of the 70s as far as clothing goes, with all these polyester clothing and these stripes and these primary colors that are to be found in YKRA, they were, I think everybody wore that. So as a child, that I think that had a very big impression on me. And then, of course, as I was growing up, this kind of had its resurgence back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It came back. Everybody was wearing these old school Adidas sweaters and superstar shoes. And so at multiple points in my life, I kind of met with the 70s, and I think I'm mostly inspired by this Eastern European version of this style, or because I think it's kind of overlooked in the West. It's really not that known, and I think that does have something to do with kind of like the visual success of YKRA, that we're just doing something very different on an international level that for us is maybe it's just in our DNA.
But how did you end up making backpacks? So how does that work
Yeah,
out?
I mean that's a very long story, because it's it wasn't like one day. I mean, of course it was like that. One day I had an idea, but the road to actually becoming an entrepreneur, that started, I think, when I was working small jobs. So I had like an idea of what you could do in Budapest. I knew all the small design businesses. There were a lot of new brands popping up, and so I felt like there was a lot of opportunity. And on the other side, I saw like how much of difference there was between brands here and brands in Paris. And like notably, I think what had like the biggest influence on me in retrospect was this shoe brand called Veja, which is a French-owned brand of sneakers manufactured in Brazil out of natural caoutchouc materials. And I think that had a huge influence on me. I think just seeing how, because before that, like in Paris, you have these trends that everybody follows. So in Paris at that time, like the trend was like, if you're a guy, you're wearing Converse with like a Levi's and a blue shirt, and that was, everybody wears the same. I mean, you talk about like the capital of fashion, like everybody's wearing the same thing. So it's kind of funny, and all of a sudden I noticed how like kids at the university were starting, like the cool kids were starting to wear this instead of Converse, and I was like, what's going on here? Like, how did they do that? Well, and I saw how this brand out of nowhere actually got me to buy a pair, in just a few months. And so I think that for me, like a light bulb, that was a light bulb moment, definitely, where I realized like, oh, like you could influence this, and so I was very intrigued by that. And I think from then on, I was kind of searching for that product or idea where you could influence people in that way. This was, I think, like before YouTube, actually. So it was quite some time ago. Or maybe it was like the early days of YouTube, but we had Tumblr. And somewhere along the way, I saw some colorful backpacks, like vintage backpacks. And I realized like, oh yeah, this is cool. And I kind of felt like I was seeing more and more of like new backpacks, and I started to feel like there's something going on. There's a thing with backpacks there. It's making a resurgence. And I wasn't seeing the old brands like Eastpak and Jansport that were cool when I was a teenager, but there were these new brands, and I felt like, okay, maybe I have a sewing machine. Why don't I learn to sew? And at some point, I just went like, okay, I'm gonna try to sew myself a backpack that I can transport my skateboard on, and but I want to make it like old school. I want to make it look like it's actually from back in the 70s. And that was kind of it. That was like the moment where I realized like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And I just started, I just went down to I was still working in the shoe store. I would just go down to the basement where we had a sewing machine. I made the first prototype, and I showed it to friends, and they were like, oh, cool. And so that was about the time when friends were opening up Telep Gallery and bar at this was already second Telep at Madách, and friends were working in the basement, and they were making messenger backpacks, and so I would go to them and show them my prototypes, and they would be like, oh, this is great, but you should actually like do this. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a great idea, and I would integrate it, and they would help me a lot. So they really, really helped me make my first real prototype. I met my now wife, then girlfriend, Yusi, who I actually met when I had the first prototype on, and I went over to her and asked her like what her name was and what she's doing, and I remember like she told me like she's studying design management. I'm like, oh yeah, actually I'm actually making my own backpack, and here it is. How do you like it? I'm like kind of like selling it to her, and I think it worked because we're still together, and obviously it was a very successful night out, and a bit later, I think her knowledge that she brought from like the design management field, and like everything she knew, it allowed us to take my ideas and just like boost them in a way that it meant that I wasn't starting out from zero.
You seem to be taking a relatively different approach to doing business than many popular fashion brands today. You keep making your products by hand and selling a very limited amount from seasonal designs, even as demand keeps increasing. Why?
So, so this was actually something that I observed with big fashion brands, that a lot of times they make tiny quantities of something, and it's just human nature. If something is hard to get, you just want it that much more. And so I think in that perspective, we were very much influenced by Supreme and street fashion, and how they would do like a limited collection, a drop, and sell that out really quickly. And I think from the first moment we realized that this is something that works really well for us, and it also allows us to make products that are unique. I mean, we can, in this way, with like manual fabrication and small quantities, we can make a limited edition of, I don't know, like 50 products, which is tiny. I mean, it basically, I sometimes joke that like, our yearly production is smaller than a limited edition with like a big brand.
What is your goal with ICRA for the upcoming years?
I think right now we're at a point where with ICRA, I kind of feel like I achieved everything that I wanted with this brand. If it doesn't grow anymore, and if we don't have any more products, but we just stay at this level and we stay the same, I'm already super happy with that. I think for me, ICRA is like a child, so I'm very protective of the brand. We've put a lot of effort into the brand, and I think for us the most important is that it stays around. Is that my goal is that it stays in our family, it stays a family business, and that it'll be around in 50 years. I would like ICRA products to become classics. And I hope that, in 50 years, that we will look at these products in the same way that today we look at a Converse shoe or a pair of Levi's.
Well, we hope that works out for you, and that 50 years from now, Aaron will be sitting at the helm of ICRA, controlling the empire.
I hope much sooner than that, for my own good.
And we thank you very much for being here.
Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon.